Good evening and welcome to the channel. In Search of Reality. My name is Adil Kabach. I am a professor of higher education at the National Institute of Statistics and Applied Economics, at Morocco, Rabat. Alongside my teaching and research career, I have been interested since my adolescence, that is, for about 40 years, in the question of reality and the search for reality. Therefore, the main objective of this channel is to share with you the results of this research. Of course, I actually intend to publish several books to cover this research. And in fact, the French version of the first book was published by L'Harmattan in Paris in 2024, entitled La science déclare la mort du matérialisme, du substantialisme au non-substantialisme. An English version of this book, entitled Science Proclaims Materialism Dead, From Substantialism to Non-Substantialism, is published by IFF Books, London and New York, 2025 to 2026. Of course, there will be several playlists dedicated to the different books and to additional information. So, this episode is primarily concerned with the question of reality and its complex nature. Of course, the first question that arises is, what is reality? Let us become aware of our existence and the existence of the world. Naturally, we are led to ask the question of reality in one way or another, and this refers to a vast, complex network of interconnected ontological questions. These are questions about the reality of the human, the reality of the universe, the reality of life, etc. And the question of reality, in fact, quickly explodes into an infinity of interdependent questions. In fact, each question triggers a multitude of other questions, which in turn provoke a multitude of questions, and so on, to such an extent that we quickly find ourselves facing an immense, complex network of ontological questions. And in fact, the person essentially becomes a huge question mark. Okay. So, to better understand the question of reality, we can, on the one hand, personalize it, and on the other hand, divide it into several categories. So, the first category, who am I? This actually concerns questions revolving around the human. What is the reality of the human? What is the reality of the mind? What is the reality of the relationship between body and mind? What is the reality of consciousness? Etc. The second category concerns the world, the physical world in which we live, of course. So, what is the reality of the physical world? What is the reality of matter, of energy, of space, of forces, of natural laws? What is the reality of the order and intelligibility we observe in the universe? Etc. There are also questions concerning origins. The origins of the universe, the origins of life, the origins of the human, etc. Do we exist due to a divine creation, as indicated in fact by monotheistic religions? Or do we exist as a result of a Darwinian evolution? Or do we exist as a result of a systemic evolution? Etc. The fourth category actually deals with the possible purpose of things. Is there, in fact, a purpose behind our existence and the existence of the world and the entire universe? There are also questions concerning our future, in fact. Is there life after death? Is there resurrection? Or is there reincarnation? Or neither? Etc. There are also, of course, questions linked to religion. And in fact, each religion has its share of ontological questions. We find questions concerning Judaism, concerning Christianity, concerning Islam, concerning Buddhism, etc. We of course ask the question, is the Bible the Word of God or human word? Or is it both at the same time? Same thing. Is Jesus divine? Is he the Son of God? Is Muhammad truly a prophet? Is the Quran divine word or human word? Etc. So there is a whole set of questions that certainly arise at this stage. There are also, of course, questions linked to society. Do we live within a global system that corresponds, in fact, to a system constituted of materialism, capitalism, individualism, and consumerism? Is this system inevitable? Etc. There are also, of course, questions concerning the ontological sources that provide the answers to ontological questions. So, the ontological sources are religion, philosophy, science, history, etc. Should we, precisely, seek the answers at the level of religion, or should we seek them at the level of science, or at the level of philosophy, or in a combination of these ontological sources, etc.? Is religion truly incompatible with science? Does religion necessarily lead to creationism? And does science necessarily lead to materialism and Darwinism? And so on. So there is a whole set of questions revolving around this category. And of course, there is the question, is the human capable of answering these ontological questions? Is reality accessible to the human? Etc. So, another very important point is, in fact, the relationships that exist between the question of reality, worldview, and ontological sources. So, the worldview, of course, offers answers to ontological questions, and the ontological sources, like religion, philosophy, and science, provide answers to ontological questions. And, of course, they thus produce worldviews, but they are based on, worldviews. So we can clearly see the very strong link between these three elements, the question of reality, the worldview, and the ontological sources. Another important point is that each person and each community possesses its own worldview and its own ontological sources, generally inherited from family and socio-cultural backgrounds, notably, of course, from the person's background. And the worldview and ontological sources are considered by default as truthful by the individuals and also by the community. Hence, of course, the importance of worldviews and ontological sources. Therefore, it is certainly important to study in detail this essential component of the human mind, which is the worldview, because in fact, the worldview nourishes and shapes the human mind. And of course, the human mind shapes, in turn, the physical world and the social world. So, in fact, the worldview strongly impacts the thought, behavior, and life of individuals and societies, and therefore, consequently, the future of humanity and the biosphere, which is our Earth, as evidenced by the impact of materialism on the history of the modern and contemporary era. There are also, of course, the ontological sources, which are also very important, because, as we have seen, the ontological sources constitute the support that allows the person or the community to justify their belief in their worldview. For example, many people adopt materialism because it is justified, according to the dominant opinion, by science. Similarly, many people believe in God because this belief is justified by their theistic religion. And so, the ontological sources certainly play a very important role in this framework. Indeed, therefore, the worldview, as we said, impacts the human mind enormously, which has a major and determining impact on the human and their physical and social world. And so, if the human mind is shaped by and according to a worldview that is erroneous or even pathological, well then, this person, or humanity in fact, will produce a pathological humanity and a pathological world. Besides, in the Gospel of Matthew, we read this beautiful saying of Jesus. He says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." We can rephrase this saying in more general terms by saying, man does not live by bread alone, but also by knowledge and belief, and therefore, of course, by worldview. So we must be careful about the nourishment, in our case here, the worldview, that we give to our mind, and also about the ontological sources that justify and support it. So, in general, indeed, the human does not ask the question of reality and does not search for reality. Why? Because, in fact, they already possess the answer in the form of a worldview, and this worldview is, of course, supported by one or several ontological sources which they consider truthful. Therefore, in this framework, why would they ask the question of reality and want to undertake a search for reality, since they already possess the answer? In fact, that's a little bit the dilemma, so to speak. So, we will stop here, and we will continue this discussion in the next episode.